Hello, this is Egon Cholakian once again. Today I am obliged to report on yet further distressing news concerning the Siberian Plume, the enormous magma structure that is aggressively eroding the base of the East Siberian Plate as I now speak. Despite my numerous pleas to take action, it would appear that the human community has elected to ignore the window of opportunity to initiate preparatory measures for a controlled degassing of the Siberian magma plume on Russian territory. Yes, you did hear me correctly. The situation we now face is vividly clear. The time when we could have and should have begun preparing for a planned and controlled degassing of the Siberian Plume has come and gone. Politely put, that course of action is no longer available to any of us. Allow me to elucidate. In 2025, the Earth entered a new phase of seismic activity. You have witnessed this yourselves. Under the influence of the plume, two powerful earthquakes with magnitudes above 7 occurred within a single week. First, a magnitude 7.0 event occurred on the border between Alaska and the Yukon. Only 2 days later, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck off the coast of Japan. This is not a random concurrence. These events are indicators of deep geodynamic processes driven by the pressure exerted by the Siberian Plume on the Earth's crust. The year 2025 confronted us with a succession of geodynamic records and anomalies. The destructive magnitude 7.7 earthquake in Myanmar on March 28th displayed unprecedented characteristics, including a supersonic rupture extending 475 kilometers. Then at the end of July, a magnitude 8.8 mega earthquake struck Kamchatka, accompanied by a series of anomalous aftershocks. It occurred only along the margin of the Eurasian plate beneath which the Siberian Plume is gaining strength. As I've stated many times before, these catastrophes will only continue to intensify. I'd like to show you just one chart today based on data from open sources. It reflects the number of earthquakes of magnitude 3 and above, according to the publicly available platform, Volcano Discovery, which aggregates seismic information from various reporting systems worldwide. As you can see, the year 2025 stands out with a dramatically increased number of earthquakes across the entire planet. I do not personally believe that such a strike can be attributed to the sudden deployment of an extraordinary number of new seismic sensors in 2025. As I have already noted, the Earth has entered a new level of seismic activity, and initiating the degassing of the Siberian Plume is no longer a viable option. Please allow me to clarify. A realistic timeline for preparing the degassing of the Siberian magma plume is at least 4 years, assuming close international cooperation and the full engagement of the world's leading specialists. The first 2 years of that period would have been devoted to control and monitoring. During those initial 2 years, fundamental research and exploratory drilling should have been conducted to ascertain precisely where degassing could have been carried out without triggering catastrophic lava breaches at the surface. We still lack a detailed understanding of the plume's internal structure, the distribution of gas reservoirs, and the composition of fluids at different depths. This phase would therefore have required establishing a network of hundreds of exploratory wells, each exceeding 5 kilometers in depth, across the expanse of the entire eastern Siberia. Undertaken in concert therewith, comprehensive seismic monitoring, geochemical gas analysis, and thermal profiling of the magma reservoirs would have been necessary. The subsequent 2-year period would have been unavoidably consumed by technical preparation, including the drilling of hundreds of ultra-deep wells, each more than 10 kilometers deep, along with the entire suite of associated engineering operations. This would have encompassed multi-stage testing of safety systems, verification of structural stability, and the full rehearsal of all procedures essential for ensuring the reliability and safety of the process. Only after all of that, meaning after roughly 4 years of intensive and critically important technical preparation, could the degassing itself begin, involving the gradual and strictly controlled release of gas and excess magma from the upper reservoirs of the plume's complex structure. As a result of such controlled degassing, the gas pressure on the lithospheric plate would have diminished. The excess magma would have been safely removed, and the temperature of the lower crust beneath Siberia would have decreased. In turn, this would have given humanity a precious interval of safety, an opportunity to focus on addressing other escalating threats without living under the constant fear that at any moment the Siberian plume could wipe out life on the planet. Yes, even a year ago, the preparatory phase of degassing carried immense risk, but now it has become utterly futile. 4 years from now, any intervention could trigger a single explosive rupture, resulting in an instantaneous and extraordinary powerful blowout of the plume. It would be like piercing an overinflated balloon with a needle, because that window has been lost. A planned degassing could now provoke the very catastrophe we have been trying to avert. I can state this with complete confidence, even though we have long since ceased receiving scientific and monitoring data from Russian territory regarding the condition of the Siberian plume. I want to emphasize the following with absolute clarity. Today I am issuing an official statement that the degassing of the Siberian plume will no longer help the situation. We have missed the opportunity in which controlled degassing could have been a viable solution. It is not the case today. I will address the remaining options a bit later. For the time being, however, I would like to address a personal message to the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Mr. Putin, I am speaking to you as someone who has spent several decades of his life trying to prevent a planetary-scale catastrophe, namely the eruption of the Siberian plume on the territory of Russia, and as someone who has personally experienced what it means to face your anti-cult network operating in the finest traditions of the KGB. We, together with the team of Alatra scientists, understand very well that your court-appointed anti-cultists from Repressions, or to be more precise, from the FSB, were safeguarding the wealth of those who were lining their pockets with Siberian mineral resources. For them, the degassing of the plume was a highly unprofitable proposal. It was cheaper to hire a pack of psychopaths under the guise of cult and sect debunkers to silence us and attempt to distort how our work was perceived internationally, so that no one would believe the scientific information about the threat posed by the Siberian plume. However, at this moment, I ask you to explain to your close associates, the very people who are profiting from Siberia, that they can leave Alatra alone, because we are leaving your Siberian plume to you. We are leaving it on your conscience, Mr. Putin. You and those around you did everything possible to prevent the public from learning about the real threat this plume poses to the citizens of Russia, the entire Eurasian continent, and the world as a whole. The activation of the Siberian plume will become a shared catastrophe, one that could eradicate life on our planet. And those who will bear responsibility for this will be your inner circle, people whose greed has long exceeded all bounds and whose love of money has become more important than human life, including even their own and yours, Mr. Putin. So you may convey the following to them. They can relax. According to our calculations, we have already passed the one window of time in which a planned degassing still had meaning. Everything they fought so fiercely to accomplish, suppressing scientific information about the plume, attempting to discredit Alatra and me personally, and branding us as a sect, is now, in light of the actual situation, utterly useless and pointless. None of it affects anything anymore. Continuing down that path would only waste their money and energy. So you may reassure them, Mr. President Putin, that for now nothing threatens their profits except, of course, the Siberian plume itself. They can continue enriching themselves on Siberia's resources, at least while Siberia still exists. Their mission, to buy themselves a couple of extra years to fill their pockets, has been accomplished. What will happen next, not only to Siberia and the people who live there, but to your country, to other nations, and to their citizens, is now a matter for your conscience, Mr. Putin. Conducting a full-scale degassing in 2 years is impossible, and we no longer have the 4 years required. Even if the world's top specialists were brought together today, it would make no difference to the situation. It pains me deeply to realize how much time we have lost trying to convey this problem and its solution to you. It is bitter to the point of anger to recognize how many human lives were shattered because these attempts, and as a result of your KGB style, discrediting campaigns and persecutions of Alatra. Think of how much suffering fell upon people who hoped and believed they would be heard and understood. How many decent individuals were forced into unjust and brutal criminal cases. How many peaceful and honest people are now locked away in Russian prisons. And for what? Because your well-groomed inner circle is so desperate to keep stuffing their insatiable pockets with money stolen from the people. Because they tremble at the thought that the Siberian scheme, which warms their wallets, might shut down. They cling to their loot so fanatically that, to intensify the persecution of Alatra even abroad, they activated their KGB network, that is, the FSB, though the essence is the same, all to conceal the truth about the Siberian plume. Mr. President, it is now known to the entire international community that it is your Russian agents who initiate and fuel the persecution of Alatra around the entire world. And the question that arises not only for me, but for many others, is why? For what reason? For trying to save the world? For the fact that each of these strong and honest people, when confronted with the harshest persecution, the threat of imprisonment, the loss of their reputation, their home, and everything we normally associate with a stable life, did not break, but continued to act for the sake of life itself, for our lives, yours and mine. Every volunteer of Alatra is a true, dignified hero. Alatra as a whole is a community of true heroes, and the source of their unshakable resolve lies in their understanding that they do not act for themselves. Each one of them acts to preserve the very possibility of life for every person on this planet. What have they done to deserve such harsh treatment from you and your closest circle? These are people striving to help all of humanity, including you and your own family. Here I am overtaken by profound incomprehension. How morally depleted and intellectually bankrupt must one be to raise a hand against those attempting to save your own life? How can you pursue those who are fighting for the very possibility of a future for your children and grandchildren, as well as for every child on this planet? Mr. President, do you have even a trace of conscience or officer's honor left? Or has money erased everything together with your conscience and your honor? Do you even comprehend what has happened? Do you understand the precipice on which you have placed human life, including your own life and the lives of your children and grandchildren? Do you grasp the edge on which you have placed everything? You can see in facts and figures how dramatically seismic activity on the planet has increased in recent years. Look again at the seismic events along the plate boundaries in the regions of Kamchatka and Japan. Is that not evidence enough? Let me tell you, we warned about this directly and openly. We warned that activity along the edges of the Eurasian plate would intensify as the plume became more active. And we warned that the strongest and most anomalous events would and could be expected in northern Japan and the Kamchatka region. We issued these warnings systematically and publicly. Today, even the most inexperienced student understands that Alatra was right and clearly recognizes the consequences that will inevitably follow. You will see this for yourself, and now the entire world will as well. Alatra was right. Yes, that is the reality. However, the tragedy is that today we are no longer in a position to help. And the equipment we deployed to mitigate climatic and geodynamic consequences, including on Russian territory, is likewise no longer able to help. Yes, it operated stably and effectively for 10 years, performing its mitigating function. And although its role was only to, figuratively speaking, dampen the foam without removing the fire, even in that capacity, it provided you with an enormous advantage. Because it was operating, your territory saw no severe progression of damage from natural disasters for 10 years, and the strength and frequency of catastrophes increased far more moderately compared to global threats. Put simply, you experienced a relatively calm decade. I am certain you expected that it would continue this way. However, beginning in 2023, through the efforts of your Racers operatives and your KGB FSB structures, you know best what to call them. This equipment ceased to function. Why? Because your associates, driven by their insatiable appetite for money, unleashed upon their KGB-style pack of cult fighters. They first discredited us and in 2023 labeled Alatra an undesirable organization so that we would stop speaking about the Siberian Plume and the world would not learn about the problem. Naturally, we were compelled to shut down the equipment and remove it, thereby halting all our activity on your territory. Now, in 2025, we are not merely undesirable in Russia, we are officially so-called extremist. Well, at this point, it makes no difference to us. What remains for you is to assess how much damage Russia has suffered from climatic disasters over these past 2 years, compared to the calm 10-year period when the equipment was operating. Moreover, I want you to understand that the benefits of this equipment were not limited to you alone. The entire world benefited from its operation, and you deprived not only yourselves of that benefit, but the entire world. I state with full responsibility, today, anyone even remotely connected to science understands this. Had the equipment continued to operate, neither the Kamchatka region nor the area around Japan would be facing the seismic threat we see this very moment. And what is certain is that the event that will inevitably occur in the near future would not be occurring at all. Mr. Putin, in addressing you directly now, I fully understand and comprehend that Russia today functions under a North Korea 2.0 model, that the internet is heavily restricted, and that everything possible is being done to prevent people from hearing Cholakian. That's right, me. But I must disappoint you. Your population is far smarter than you assume. What I am saying will be heard regardless, both by Russians and by people in other countries. Your attempts to limit their population's access to the truth under a respectable pretext that supposedly protects them are laughable. Stop lying to your people, to your voters, claiming that you are cutting off their internet access to protect them. You are doing it to preserve the money you extract from Siberia and to prevent them from hearing Cholakian. Yeah, me. They see what is happening around them. Homes are collapsing because the permafrost is melting. Winds have grown so strong that they destroy everything in their path. Massive floods, inundations, river overflows, and catastrophic fires are occurring. Everyone can see the impact of climate-driven disasters. None of this can be concealed anymore. And people are beginning to understand that the period of relative stability ended the moment we were forced to shut down the equipment that had provided that advantage. You killed the goose that laid your golden eggs. No sane person would have done such a thing, yet now you silence everyone and launch repressions. The entire world, and Russians in particular, remember the era of Yuzhov and Stalin well. And what do we see today? The era of Dvorkin and Putin. You have recreated the same thing. You placed a maniac and a psychopath, the so-called respected Professor Dvorkin, in a position where he decides who is thrown into prison and who is not. Dvorkin has revived repressions in the footsteps of Yuzhov. How many people today have been imprisoned because of him, and how many are under investigation? How effortlessly he managed to organize a campaign against Alatra in the finest communist traditions of Yuzhov. Looking back, when Yuzhov and Stalin annihilated hundreds of thousands, millions of lives, people today ask, how was this even possible? Where were the officers? What were they doing? They were exactly where they are now. Mr. President, why is it that none of your officers tells you the truth to your face? The truth that the country is being run by a maniac and a psychopath, Mr. Dvorkin, with his vast KGB network, or rather FSB, though the essence is the same. No, they do not tell you that. But your officers do say, well, Dvorkin is nobody. Nobody, and yet they follow his orders, not yours, Mr. President. Because the people around you are those who listen to this psychopath. And you, a man who came to power promising democracy and freedom to the Russian people, have created terror and repression reminiscent of Stalin's era. Are you proud of this? Say it honestly. Please tell me, what blinded you? Did you simply forget the promises you made to the people who trusted you? Or have the billions torn from their pockets burned your conscience to ashes? While you and your entourage appropriated trillions, millions of your fellow citizens were condemned to poverty. In freezing homes without heating, in villages without roads or the basic conditions for life, they look anxiously into the eyes of their sick children, not knowing how they will afford medicine tomorrow. Has the mountain of wealth built on your people's suffering so clouded your vision that you have begun to walk the path of 1937, persecuting everyone who dares to voice even a fraction of the truth? Mr. Putin, put yourself in the place of an ordinary citizen of your country. Would you want to live with your family under a president who unleashed repressions across the nation, who persecuted you and your family? Of course not. But you are hardly capable of placing yourself in the position of an ordinary citizen because you have remained in power too long and billions have clouded your vision. Forgive me, but no one but me will say this to you. You have forgotten what honor is and what people are. You and your followers have imagined yourselves as beings above everyone else. And I want to tell you that your Siberian Plume will equalize all of you. You are no demigods, and none of you has a second life. If you have forgotten that, I will remind you. You are just as human as everyone else. You have merely forgotten who you were supposed to be. And here lies the answer to how years off and Stalin could carry out such monstrous repressions, and where the officers were at that time, or rather what became of them. An officer is meant to embody honor and protect the citizen. Yet in your system today, officers have become lackeys who protect your power. And I know this with certainty. At a signal, they tear into the targets assigned to them like dogs, without even thinking about the consequences. That is precisely why none of them will ever tell you the truth to your face, the truth that I am telling you now. And the Siberian Plume, and the future itself, all of this rests on your conscience. And you will be accountable. Although to whom will you answer? If the Siberian traps erupt again, there will be no one left to hold accountable, and no one before whom to stand. It could have been different, but the time has been lost. Therefore, now that there is no hope for a controlled degassing, all that remains to us is to search for a solution in alternative directions. Yes, alternative. May sound almost encouraging, but in truth, this is not an alternative at all. It is a problem we have been working on for nearly 20 years, and for which we still have not found a complete solution. Perhaps we lacked laboratories, equipment, or simply the intellect required, because a challenge of this magnitude should have long ago engaged the world's greatest minds. This challenge concerns the continuation of life on Earth itself. I am now speaking to you about nanoplastic and catastrophic destructive influence on the planet's ecosystems and on all living organisms, including the human organism. Let me remind you, with every breath and with every sip of water and every bite of food, billions of micro and nanoparticles of plastic enter your body. They settle, accumulate, and internally destroy your health, disrupting natural processes in your cells, mitochondria, neurons, and even your DNA. These plastic particles do not break down and are almost never expelled, which means quite literally that they do not leave your body. This means that right now in your bloodstream, brain, and neurons, billions upon billions of indestructible and active nanoplastic particles are circulating and accumulating. Moreover, they are already present and continue to accumulate, even in the bodies of children who are still in the womb. As a result, an increasing body of evidence indicates the emergence of a global and perilous trend. Under the influence of nanoplastic, which systematically destroys the human organism at the cellular level, humanity may face a gradual loss of cognitive functions, meaning the loss of the ability to think fully, and the loss of reproductive functions, meaning the loss of the ability to reproduce. The final outcome of these processes is the disappearance of Homo sapiens as a biological species. For a long time, the scientific community regarded nanoplastic as an inert material incapable of active interaction with living systems. However, research and numerous laboratory experiments in recent years have clarified the opposite. Nanoplastic is not inert, and what makes it an active agent is its ability to accumulate electrostatic charge on its surface. For this reason, once it enters the organism, it begins to interact intensely at the cellular and molecular levels, disrupting vital functions. We understood 20 years ago that micro and nanoplastic are not inert. Moreover, Alatra scientists explicitly stated that the primary danger of nanoplastic lies precisely in its ability to accumulate and retain an electrostatic charge for extended periods. It is this accumulated charge that enables nanoplastic to interfere with the basic electrical processes of all organisms, disrupting the fundamental mechanisms of their functioning and interrupting the impulse of life. We also explained that this property makes nanoplastic similar to an electric, a material capable of preserving electrostatic charge for a very long time. Figuratively speaking, a magnet made of electrostatic electricity. Having identified the problem, Alatra scientists were likewise the first to indicate its solution. If nanoplastic is stripped of its electric-like properties, the root of its harmfulness can be removed. In other words, nanoplastic must be rendered inert by depriving it of its charge. It sounds simple, but in reality it is an extraordinarily complex task. The challenge is not to create a new type of plastic with different characteristics, but to alter the properties of nanoplastic that already exist in our bodies, in the bodies of all other living creatures on the planet, and in the air, soil, and water across the world. Today, the search for a solution to this problem must engage scientists everywhere. And to grasp the true scale of what is unfolding, I strongly recommend that you watch the documentary Nanoplastics, Threat to Life. It premiered on December 7th and was produced by Alatra volunteers with the support of the Analytical Center, Alatra Global Research Center. This is not merely a film, it is a culmination of many years of research presenting the threat of micro and nanoplastic as clearly as it can possibly be shown in a popular scientific format. The film brings together scientific data, the work of leading researchers, their direct testimony, and their real stories. It reveals what the global scientific community is only now beginning to openly acknowledge: how nanoplastic is systematically destroying our biosphere and ourselves. For the first time, a single film presents a comprehensive and systematic overview of the entire body of scientific evidence regarding the actual impact of micro and nanoplastic. This is the first study to reveal the full extent of this threat, shedding light on the true magnitude of the danger that looms over current and future generations. Watch this film. It will put many things into perspective if you dare to look at reality without illusions. There are no exaggerations here, only facts gathered from across the world and the cold logic of processes already underway. Processes that cannot be stopped if we continue pretending that everything is under control. Moreover, the film makes it eminently clear that even if we were to abandon plastic entirely tomorrow, the situation would not be saved. The quantity of micro and nanoplastic particles already present in the biosphere is enough to destroy it several times over. Another critical danger of nanoplastic lies in its influence on the planet's climate system. Its particles interfere with heat exchange processes and atmospheric dynamics, amplifying the overall warming of the Earth. The saturation of the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere with micro and nanoplastic is already leading to the acidification of ocean waters, rising ocean temperatures, disruptions in atmospheric processes, intensifying storms, and other natural disasters. Allow me to remind you of a fact that vividly illustrates what happens when the solutions we proposed are ignored. Several years ago, when the nanoplastic problem had not yet reached a critical stage, we at ALLATRA proposed a timely and effective solution to cool the world ocean, returning it to its normal temperature after it had become overheated. The proposal was for a large-scale transition to the use of atmospheric water generators, AWGs. This technology would have accelerated natural evaporation from the ocean surface, which in turn would have cooled it. The process also had a second equally important effect: the potential to remove micro and nanoplastic particles from the ocean. It was a twofold solution to an impending catastrophe. However, our proposal went unheard, and now the time is gone. Irrevocably, the concentration of nanoplastic in the ocean and the atmosphere has reached a point of no return, where the technology we proposed years ago as a means of preservation would now become an accelerant of catastrophe. If we initiate large-scale evaporation using AWGs today, something horrific will occur. The operation of these generators would cause an even greater quantity of micro and nanoplastic particles to transfer from the ocean into the atmosphere. As a result, instead of cleansing the planet, we would transform it into a sealed chamber even more saturated with these charged plastic particles, and therefore heating even faster. Moreover, we would trigger a sharp exponential surge in the concentration of nanoplastic in the air we breathe, and consequently an even more rapid and irreversible destruction of human health and of humanity's future itself. Thus, a technology created to purify and preserve life, when applied too late, becomes a technology of mass destruction. We lost the precious window of opportunity in which, by deploying AWGs across the world, we could have reduced the micro and nanoplastic burden and gained immense time for humanity. We could have cleansed the ocean. We could have cleansed the atmosphere, but we did not. The issue of AWGs was buried under the howling of your KGB operatives, who branded us a sect and our ideas as pseudoscience. They made us unheard. Today, however, the mask has come off. The whole world now sees where the pseudoscience was and where the reliable science forecasts were. Everything we forecast is happening precisely, point by point, as we speak, including the seismic events in Japan, in the Kamchatka region, associated with the growing activity of the Siberian Plume, and many others. Everything is unfolding exactly as we predicted. So who turned out to be the pseudoscience? Who are the apologists of deception? They are the Vinogradovs and others like them, with their Academy of Great Sciences, who appear on prime Russian channels and shamelessly lie to their citizens, telling Russians that the activation of the Siberian Plume is nothing to fear. They say, "Move to Siberia with your children. It is good here." If they are so confident, then let them take their own children from other continents and bring them to live in Siberia, since it is supposedly such a safe and pleasant place. And we will watch how they live there. If you say Siberia is safe, prove it to the people. To summarize what has been said, a tragic pattern is unfolding before us. And we already have two clear examples of how effective technologies, when not applied in a timely manner, not only cease to be useful, but also turn into the opposites. These are the atmospheric water generators, AWGs, and the technologies of controlled degassing of the Siberian Plume. Twice we were not heard, and twice as a civilization we are losing a working instrument that could have eased our path and delayed catastrophe. Had the solutions we proposed, AWGs and degassing, been applied in time, humanity could have continued its course calmly, focusing on its own pursuits. Even those same greedy profiteers who enrich themselves on Siberian resources at the expense of humanity's future could have continued stuffing their pockets and chasing their delusional attempts to extend their miserable lives beyond the limits of the species. But today I must state, it is pointless to speak of extending life when the killer has already penetrated the very place where life begins. When he destroys children in the womb, rendering them disabled, what extension of life do you speak of? When the generation being born now already faces a high likelihood of having no offspring due to the influence of nanoplastic. And if offspring do appear, they will bear severe disabilities. And now we face a third chance, a chance to solve the nanoplastic problem. We propose a specific fundamental solution to strip nanoplastic particles of their ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge. In this field, the Allatra movement has accomplished immense work. Believe me, far more than anyone is willing to acknowledge. We have completed one of the key tasks of any scientific investigation. We identified the cause. Yes, we have not found the final solution, but we have uncovered the root mechanism. And that has saved the global scientific community decades of work and colossal resources. We clearly indicated the direction nanoplastic must be deprived of its electric charge. When that happens, it will become inert, turn into ordinary dust, and cease to pose a deadly threat to human health and the planet's ecosystem. And then the natural mechanisms of self-restoration will begin to function. Heat exchange in the atmosphere and the ocean will start to recover. Excess heat from the Earth's interior will once again be able to escape freely into space. The ocean and the atmosphere will begin returning to equilibrium. And then possibly, and I emphasize possibly, the plume may not activate if the experimental equipment that operated for 10 years is restored and if the necessary set of measures is carried out. But today, all of this sounds like science fiction, because we, Allatra, The ones who articulated this scientific knowledge were simply expelled from your territories and discredited throughout the world. I want you to know, I state with confidence that individuals like Mr. Vinogradov and those similar to him on whom you rely lack both the intellect and the will to create anything of this kind. People like Mr. Vinogradov are capable only of lying on national television, betraying their own citizens in order to preserve their personal status. And while they lie, the situation is deteriorating catastrophically. Given this trajectory, what comes next, Mr. Putin? I do not believe you are capable of answering that question correctly. But I can, and I can answer it directly and honestly. If you and your counterparts in other countries who hold the same positions you hold, and upon whom the lives of people also depend, treat the nanoplastic problem with the same criminal negligence you showed towards AWGs and the degassing of the Siberian Plume, the following will occur. Billions of people will die prematurely from diseases caused by micro and nanoplastic penetrating every organ. Official statistics will not show this link. These ailments will be disguised as ordinary illnesses, cancer, heart failure, or neurological disorders. But the root cause will be the same, micro and nanoplastic. Those who survive will rapidly deteriorate, losing their cognitive capacities. The human mind, our highest endowment, will begin to fade. All that will remain of the human being are basic animal instincts. A brutal primitive struggle for survival and for food will begin. In both the literal and figurative sense, you will start devouring one another. Forgive my bluntness, but I am compelled to speak plainly. The strong will consume the weak. Do you remember the zombie apocalypse films? That scenario will become reality only without makeup and special effects. We now find ourselves in a dead-end situation, an extremity of your own making. The time for deploying AWGs has been lost. The time for a planned degassing of the Siberian Plume has been lost. Control over the planet's heat balance has been lost. The only rational path left is to search for solutions to neutralize micro and nanoplastic. And that search must begin immediately. Understand where the tragedy lies. With the Siberian Plume, we had a clear plan, a roadmap for survival. Here, however, we must honestly admit that there is still no ready-made solution for rendering these particles harmless. It must be invented, but we have identified the root of the problem, and we point to the only viable path to strip nanoplastic particles of their ability to accumulate and retain electrostatic charge. This is a fundamental signpost for the entire global scientific community. We do not know who will be the one to offer us this life-saving idea. A genius in a laboratory? Or perhaps an ordinary citizen who in a sudden flash of intuition grasps the essence of the process. Anyone may become the person who finds the solution. The necessary idea may arise in anyone's mind. History has seen such miracles, but that idea has not yet come to us. In our search for a solution, we continue to work honestly and diligently in this direction. Yet the responsibility for finding it no longer lies solely with us. It rests on every person who is capable of thought. Let me be clear. We have done everything within our power. We acted to the last moment. We endured harassment, dehumanization, and prison cells imposed on us by a system that feared the truth. We stood firm. Our conscience is clear before the history and before God. And yes, we are not giving up. We still believe we will find that solution. But there is no time left for self-deception. Because in the end, what else is worth fighting for if not life itself? For the right of our children to see the sun, to breathe, simply to exist. There is no greater purpose, and we will not have another moment in which to act. I know one thing with absolute certainty: life is worth fighting for.